So once again, thank you hugely to all our speakers, and I am now going to hand over to Linda and open the session. So thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to the Big Tent's Queer Debate. My name is Linda Riley. I'm the publisher of Diva magazine. For those of you who don't know, it's the UK's largest magazine for LGBTQI women. I also founded last year Lesbian Visibility Week, an event again for LGBTQI women. I'm stressing this because all our events, I myself am a cis lesbian. I define myself as she, but I think it's really important to say that all events that we do at Diva are totally inclusive of LGBTQI and non-binary lesbians as well. I think you can see from my bio that I'm big on lesbian visibility, but again, to be clear, that this has to include all LGBTQI women. I'd like to say a few words about myself personally. Last week I was delighted to be made Stonewall Housing Global Ambassador, which is an organisation for homeless LGBT, no matter the age. I think it's really, really important because for me, coming out as a working class ethnic minority, Armenian culture, lesbian, I was homeless at 15, and you know, to get to this position here, as I'm publisher of Diva, I always want to try and give back to the community as much as possible. Which really moves me on to talk about the impact of COVID and what we're going to go through over the next few months on COVID. For all of you those watching, I'd just like to say we've been fantastic to each other. I think during COVID, during the previous lockdown, I think we could take a few moments to look out for people within our community that are experiencing very, very big hardship, being isolated from their family during this time, maybe being secretly gay, closeted. We all have to recognise, you know, we're here today. So many of us are out and proud, but there are just so many people I come across all the time at Diva who are, you know, unable to come out to their family for various reasons. And during lockdown, that's been much more difficult. So what I'm trying to do is just sort of shine a positive light during the times of COVID and what we're coming up to in the next few months, and, you know, just to try and be there to support each other as a community, because what I've liked seeing coming from the community during these times is the sense of togetherness and positivity and support to each other. And I think that that's a message that, you know, we need to try to keep putting out, because too often we look at the negative side of the community, but there's so much more to look at. You know, I myself, when I was talking previously about coming out and being homeless as gay, it was my family, my LGBTQ community, who looked after me and took me in, and you know, I'll never forget that. So I'm going to stop talking about myself. There's some really interesting questions coming up this evening. Really looking forward to a great debate. And all the great questions we've got coming up. So I'm going to start by introducing, what is her name again? Baroness Ruth Hunt, former CEO of Stonewall UK, and now co-founder and director of Deeds and Words. Baroness Ruth Hunt, over to you.
Thanks, Linda, and it's really good to be with you today and to see so many friendly and inspiring faces in the crowd. It's been a slightly odd time for the last few months. Our worlds have all shrunk quite dramatically, I think, and our perspectives can sometimes be warped by that. I think that one of the things that I'm really struck by in the time at the moment is, as Linda said, the need for us to really build bridges between our communities and do everything we can. So I'm really pleased to be joining us here today, acutely aware it's Black History Month, and although there's not someone Black on this panel today, I know that I just want to give a shout out to the amazing work of UK Black Pride. Pav is there from here, but if you don't know about UK Black Pride, an amazing organisation that supports LGBT people of colour, then look them up now on your side chat. Thank you.
Well, with that, I will actually move over to introducing the wonderful Councillor Pav Akhtar. Pav is an NHS Equalities lead and Preston City Councillor, and he's also an equality and employment law specialist. Welcome tonight, Pav.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you to Big Tent for hosting. Just by way of introduction, really, I mean, I ought to say that, I mean, I work in the NHS, so I'm going to concentrate a little bit on that in terms of the work that we've been doing to try and tackle both the physical and also the mental effects of COVID and then long COVID, not just for those in our communities, but also for those serving in the National Health Service. And within the National Health Service, there are around 30,000 LGBT plus staff, openly LGBT staff operating on the front line. And what happens in our workplaces extends into our communities. And I think that COVID really, as others have said, has really made the world a much smaller place. And it's also really, in my view, exposed just how vulnerable and frail our societies are in terms of the fragility of the social networks and the support networks that we have, the extended families that we've created, the chosen families that we've created. Often that isn't a choice that many LGBT people have. Sometimes our families come from a Pakistani, Indian, Muslim family here in the United Kingdom, but sometimes our families aren't always so accepting of us, and so our chosen families, our LGBTI families, are really the closest that we have to a family. And in lockdown, I think what's happened is it's really exposed just how difficult it is to remain connected, to access the support networks that we might ordinarily have, and the consequences of that are absolutely clear. And in my view, they're actually quite devastating. I work primarily for a mental health trust, mental health and community trust, and it's very, very clear to see the spike in service users who've presented now. I will just touch on, Ruth mentioned that, involved with UK Black Pride. I'm a director of UK Black Pride. Prior to that, I was involved with Iman, the Muslim LGBT organisation. I am a local authority councillor too, in local council in Lancashire in the north of England. There is life beyond London, and it's sometimes a good life. But what's been very, very clear over the last few months and last 6 months or so in particular is just how we've struggled to get a democratic handle on civic participation too. So I'll leave it there, if that's okay, Linda, and then I'm happy to come back.
Yeah, thanks very much. My next introduction is Michelle T. Michelle is an award-winning author of over a dozen books for teenagers, young adults and kids, including the cult classic Valencia. Welcome to Michelle. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. It's amazing to be here. Good morning from Los Angeles, which is unceded Tongva land. It's 9 a.m. here, 10 a.m. And it's a real honor to get to speak with all of these folks and to get to essentially be in the UK in my mind right now. I was supposed to be there last month or the month before for some book stuff, and that got canceled by COVID. But I've written extensively about really my own experience as somebody who came out as queer in the early 90s and came from a working class background, didn't go to college, worked in the sex industry to get by for a time, and then came to San Francisco from New England and found my place among a real community of artists and activists and really renegade queers who are pushing the boundaries of politics, culture, sex, relationships, all of it. So that's where I come from, and as a result, I just want to say that I hope that the things that are most in my heart around, queer issues right now are that we all become more worthy of the work and sacrifice that trans women have done for the queer community to elevate us and make our lives more broad and more possible, and that we all become more aware of and worthy of the magic of all trans people, and specifically trans women, who make me feel really happy to be a woman, actually, and to get to be a woman alongside other trans women who I consider my sisters in struggle. I did come of age in a funny way, working in the sex industry in my early 20s. I came out and was also in the sex industry sort of at the same time, and became aware that there's a lot of queer people that work in the sex industry. There are a lot of, queer femmes, cisgendered lesbians or bisexual women who work in the sex industry. There are lots of gay men, of course, who work in the sex industry. There's lots of trans women who work in the sex industry. And, what we want to do is really make that work as safe for people as possible. And decriminalization is a really important step towards that, because as long as sex workers are seen as criminals and not laborers, as they have been for millennia, then it makes the work really dangerous. And as far as folks wanting to get out of it or stay in it or whatever, those questions can't even be addressed when the daily work environment essentially is so scary for folks with the threat of arrest and et cetera. So that's all from me for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. The next panelist I'm going to introduce, last but not least, is Bobbi Pickard. Bobbi is the founder of Trans in the City and a trustee of Mermaids. Bobbi is the first openly transgender person in BP, and as co-chair of BP's Pride Transgender Group, has transformed trans awareness within the company. She's the founder of Trans in the City, a corporate collaboration of over 200 major organisations, which furthers transgender awareness globally. Welcome, Bobbi.
Thanks so much, Linda, and thanks everyone at the Big Tent for inviting me. It really is a pleasure, as everyone else has said, to be here. I think that the last 2 years have been extremely hostile for trans people, and especially for trans women and non-binary people. I think the messages and the conversations around trans inclusiveness in our society have become more polarized and have contained more vilification. And that's against a backdrop of really a vacuum of knowledge about what transgender and what trans non-binary really is. We all want to live in a society where we and our families can flourish, and that's particularly poignant this year with COVID happening and compressing all of those family groups down to the barest minimum. But the society that allows for that is a society that's based on respect, and it's based on inclusion. It's one that welcomes all diversities and recognises how that benefits the whole of society. Inclusion's not a fixed pie. It's not something that you have to share out. It's not something where to include more people, to give more people rights, you have to take a slice of that pie away from somebody else to give it to somebody that you want to include. More inclusion and more rights in your society just means that your society's rights and inclusion expands. And that's really an important point to remember around some of the conversations about transgender rights, especially those that become more polarized around trans women's rights. The truth is that rights for trans people and trans women don't affect other people in any way. In lots of ways, they're very complementary to other parts of society. Into that vacuum of knowledge that we have, some organisations and people have stepped in with some misdirections and kind of stoked some unfounded fears among people that just simply don't have the knowledge about what transgender really is. And that's really the role that we're trying to fulfil with Trans in the City, is to raise that level of awareness that transgender is just a perfectly natural variation of brain development under the influence of hormones in humans. It's a perfectly natural form of being human. And really, you know, the exclusion that's being suggested in some quarters of trans people is something that's not good for society, as well as not being good for trans people. Exclusion of any portion of our society has never been successful to that society. Inclusion is how we make our society better. And the queer debate, if you like, isn't to discuss how we recognise that trans people exist. It's how we can really make the inclusion of trans people work for everybody in our society and solve some of the problems that trans people in our society have. Thanks, Linda.
Thank you very much, Bobbi. We're now going to move on to some pre-submitted questions, which I think everybody will answer, so I'll go round as we started and then change that rotation after the second question. So the first question is from somebody we've already heard from, Councillor Pav Akhtar, the NHS Equalities lead. Pav asks, COVID has shone a light on the realities of LGBT plus exclusion from healthcare. What is the way to ensure NHS trusts really take on board LGBT plus communities' diverse health needs? Ruth, we'll start with you.
Well, thanks, Linda. I mean, when I worked at Stonewall when I was working on research, I produced some research called the Lesbian Health Report, where we conducted some research with over, I think it was 9,000 lesbians at the time, that explored their health needs. And the year after, we produced something similar around gay men. And that Lesbian Health Report was the first time there'd ever been data collection on lesbian health. And of course, since then, DIVA, of course, has done many surveys with lesbians. So I'm really aware that certainly since the Macpherson report, since the introduction of the Equality Act, and indeed since 2010, there is so much evidence about the needs of lesbian, gay, bi and trans people and what their health needs are. And what we're seeing is exactly the same pattern in staff as well, that staff from LGBT communities often don't feel able to bring their expertise to bear when it comes to designing clinical practice and outcomes. So we have this wealth of data, but a kind of a stuckness about how to kind of move things forward. And I think we can all agree that the NHS at the moment and in the past has been chronically overwhelmed by the sheer volume of tasks they have to undertake. The job of keeping people well has come into sharp relief during COVID, and quite how much we can expect from our NHS. I think that what we all need to do is work with the NHS to find ways of helping them understand that the way they design interventions is really important. So even, for example, for Black and minority ethnic communities, when COVID, the first wave came, it was impossible to find any of the guidance in community languages. It was impossible to get the daily briefings from Downing Street accompanied by a signer. It was impossible to help policymakers understand that for many LGBT people living alone, this period of isolation would be acutely difficult. If you're estranged from your family, if you're forced to live with your family, the risk of domestic violence, as Linda has alluded to. Getting all those lenses placed on a pandemic really brings into light what happens when those lenses are missing. And I think the absence of women talking about COVID from a health or political perspective just goes to show quite how narrow the lenses are in making these decisions. And I think that's where the power of having support for each other comes in. So LGBT communities talking about the importance of thinking about race in relation to COVID, making sure that gay men and sex workers, etc., have access to the support they need during COVID. It's where we achieve far more standing together than we do alone. But I think the NHS needs all the resource it can get. And I hope that this current crisis provides that time and resource that the NHS needs to really rocket boost the culture change that's needed to put minority communities at the heart of practice.
Thank you, Ruth. Pav, we'll move to you next. If you could answer.
Thanks. Happy to answer my own question, which I drafted actually before I was joining the panel. So, there we are. I apologise for that, but it is an important issue, and I'm really glad for the response that Ruth has given as a legislator sitting in the Lords. I think it's really important from a practitioner point of view, working in the National Health Service, that we reflect on the reality that these inequalities that have been exposed have been long-standing. They've been long-standing inequalities that really COVID has brought under a microscope and really exposed for what they are, which is systemic inequalities that have been too long ignored and underinvested in and underused. We've underutilized our greatest resource, I think, in the United Kingdom, and that is the LGBT community organisations that we have, who are doing some really fantastic work, often in silos. We haven't really valued them as community assets. And I think there's something about a culture change, a mindset change, both within the NHS, but also within the communities. So my challenge really to the NHS is this: how do we begin to properly invest in and value the LGBT organisations who are doing fantastic work day in, day out with LGBT people, LGBT communities, on their terms in those communities? How do we, as an NHS trust or NHS organisation, start looking at people? Ruth called it the lenses, and recognising that there are intersectional lenses. One can be a black woman and be lesbian at the same time, but in the NHS we tend to take a two-dimensional approach, which is we tend to look at a person based on race or on sexual orientation or other, but we don't really do the intersectionality piece terribly well. And I think that's a real challenge for us, because certainly some of the research which we've had, we've done internal data, and it's showing quite shocking levels of disparity in terms of inequalities. We know that BAME communities were disproportionately impacted, but we also know that around 49% of trans people were not accessing healthcare. 49% fewer trans people were coming in to access healthcare than in non-COVID times. Now that tells me that there's a problem, and it's not a problem that we're geared up to be able to respond to. And my second challenge is this, and that's to the LGBT organisations themselves. And I'll say this, I say this as an LGBT person: we've got to get better at engaging with statutory authorities. We've got to get smarter at, seeking a seat at the table, and then using our voice, our collective voice, and speaking with one voice, many accents. And that's the way I approach it. One voice, many accents. We'll have different viewpoints, and that's okay. But we've got to speak with one unified voice to demand more and better resources, better targeted resources. And I'd like to think, the government or the NHS England recently published the NHS People Plan, which for the first time in my adult life has really talked about that asset-based approach to communities. And it's really saying that to reduce inequalities, NHS trusts must work with community organisations. And what I'm telling you is this, to the LGBT organisations in the room today, that this is an open door invitation to you, an open door invitation for you to take your seat at the table. I'm genuinely grateful to the government and the NHS England for allowing that, for enabling that. It's a responsibility that we have to ensure that we utilise it. So it's the NHS People Plan, and it's the inclusion, tackling inequalities agenda within it that we have a real opportunity to use to try and improve the experience and health outcomes for LGBT plus people. Thanks, Linda.
Thanks very much, Pav. We'll now move on to Michelle.
Hi, I'm coming in from the United States, where we do not have socialized healthcare. And so you can imagine we have all of the social problems that are being discussed with, African Americans are dying from COVID at, I believe, twice the rate. We know that people of color are hugely disproportionately impacted by the illness. They get sick more frequently, sick for longer, and have a higher mortality rate. And this is all happening in the absence of any kind of socialized medicine. I currently have no health insurance. Like, my health insurance was $100 and then suddenly went up to $700 for no reason, and then to $400, and then just got canceled. So I'll be making a lot of phone calls coming up. But there's a huge fight here, of course, to increase I mean, unfortunately, you know, you guys know we're just a trash fire in the United States. Like, we're dealing with so much insanity in our government. And, you know, there is a long-standing push for socialized medicine, and people will still keep working towards that. And, you know, looking out for community services to sort of pick up the little pieces. And I don't think it's probably happening very well. So that's my input from America.
Thank you very much, Michelle from America. I'm now going to move to Bobbi.
Yeah, you know, it's from a trans perspective, we know that the NHS has been severely challenged and has been failing trans people for many years now. The waiting lists for first appointments, initial appointments for those experiencing gender dysphoria before the pandemic had risen to over 3 years from something that should be within 18 weeks. So we know there's a huge challenge fundamentally there in the NHS. That significantly got worse through COVID, as you'd expect. And it's been compounded actually by the loss of private treatments as well. And we're not talking just about hormone therapy or gender confirmation surgery there. We're talking about the things that people just use to manage their gender dysphoria day to day, like simple things like electrolysis and stuff like that, which may sound superficial, but actually has a huge effect on the mental well-being of trans people. I think from going back to Pav's point of the NHS People Plan and being able to speak with one voice, I know from experience from trans in the city, one of the biggest challenges I had to get the NHS on board trans in the city, and I think we've just achieved it this year. But the biggest challenge we had actually was its fragmented management structure. You know, we have essentially lots of independent trusts around the country, and we already know that some are better at LGBT healthcare than others. Some have better training. Lots of the issues, I believe, in the NHS are because some low impact therapies for LGBT people aren't being pushed out to general practitioners, and general practitioners aren't being given the backing and the training to be able to provide those to LGBT people. And that's an issue as well, because it clogs up the already congested centre that we have for healthcare. I do think it's the NHS People Plan that Pav mentioned is, I think, hugely important, and that recognition of LGBT plus organisations playing a role in providing healthcare to LGBT plus people, I think is essential. I do worry that, again, it's going to end up being a fragmented trust-based approach rather than a central base that could be leveraged properly and planned properly. But either way, you know, I think that the message of one unified voice with lots of accents is extremely valid and well put.
Thank you, Bobbi. My next question is from Thomas Behrman, who's a student. We're going to start with Pav. Thomas is asking, and I hope this is not a difficult question for everyone, because I found it difficult to answer, so I'm glad I'm just a chair. What are the best ways for young queer students to help create opportunities for other queers to thrive in the still somewhat hostile work environment?
That is a difficult question.
Sorry about that.
Well, look, you know, Thomas, what I will say to you is that I think it takes a great deal of courage to be out and open and bring your best self to your workplace. The benefits of doing so are immense. I know that from the work that I've done from a lived experience point of view. As I say, I'm up in Lancashire, which is not it's not terribly gay and jolly. It's not London, it's not Manchester. You know, it's a little bit remote. For me, what I found a great solace in is trying to establish LGBT staff networks. That's something that I've initiated in the trust that I work in. I think it's a really powerful tool to bring people together, particularly in times where, I say this in a COVID context, or indeed where your local geography is such that you can't necessarily physically catch up with people. It's really important that you are able to connect, because the reality for many of us, you know, who are LGBT is that, well, I speak from experience, but from my own experience, that our families aren't always with us. You know, in those times that we need them most. And so we rely on the social networks that we can construct. Some of those will be within workplaces and some of those will be outside of work. And it may be that if you can't construct a workplace network within your specific workplace, there might be an industry-based network that might be of interest or possible. I know in the NHS, we have a national NHS network of LGBT activists, and Ruth's done some really good work with us already, I think. But I know within workplaces, that's really important too. So I'd encourage you to look at that option, and they can be managed you know, on a membership basis. Also to use the power of social media. As a local councillor, you know, we haven't been in my other role, in my life. I mean, I work in local politics, and it's been really important to connect communities. And the isolation piece, it's not just for the LGBT community, it's for our older generation, and you know, older people, for marginalised communities who, for one reason or the other, just haven't been able to physically connect. The digital connection has been an absolutely critical resource, and to build those communities online, you know, use those spaces to build, you know, to maintain your mental health, if nothing else, and to build some connection, because I think that's what's going to get us through what we're going through in terms of the pandemic.
Thank you, Pav. Michelle?
Thomas, I'm sorry, it sounds like you're in a hard work environment, which is the worst. And it is brave of you to be thinking about how you can make it easier for yourself and other queer people. I think what Pav just said about outside networks is really important. And if you've got it in you to be the person to start that outside network, if one doesn't exist, there's so many ways to reach out to other queer people and say like, hey, you know, I'm having a miserable time at my work. Is anybody else dealing with something like this? Can we all go meet up at a cafe and just like share strength and resources? Something like that could be really invaluable. It also makes me wonder, you know, I don't know the specifics, but, you know, what form this hostility is taking. I mean, there are legal protections, and I don't know if there's like an HR department where you work or some way that you can do a formal complaint. I mean, that takes a lot to have to fight against, you know, your daily environment. But again, if you have it in you, it could be beneficial and, you know, in the long run and for the future of that company and other queers who might come after you. And then finally, your mental health and your like peace of mind is really important. And at any point, if it starts just being too much of a fight for you, there's nothing wrong with just looking for a new job and maybe prioritizing even one where queer people are valued on their teams and in the workplace. But I wish you so much luck sorting all of this out.
Thank you, Michelle. Bobbi?
Yeah, you know, it's a really great question, and actually, funnily enough, something that I've been working on in the last couple of weeks at BP. You know, students and young employees are far more likely to go back into the closet when they start their first job. So they're out of the closet at university, and then in their first job, they're pressured back into the closet, which is actually, I think, a pretty disgusting state of affairs for any young LGBT plus person to go through. These are the people that aren't just the voices of the future. These are the people that are the future of our organisations. These are the people that are going to be running our society and our organisations. And while it might be, it might seem useful to talk to an old bag like me and listen to my views, you know, the people's views that we should be listening to are those young people and amplifying their views, because that's where the world will be heading. It won't be heading to the world as I see it. It will be heading to where those young people are headed. You know, the way to help young students and young people thrive in our workplaces as really valid queer individuals is to raise education in those businesses that don't have the education level to be able to make them welcome. And if we don't make them welcome, we'll lose that inclusion and diversity that makes our company more innovative, more successful, and more profitable. So not only is it a good thing to do, it makes hugely good business sense to do that. So that's a typical business waffle about, oh yeah, it'd be a great way to do it. The way to really do it, as I think has really been touched on, is to see if there is an LGBT plus community in your environment. If there isn't, then start one. It depends on the size of your organisation. But, you know, in terms of practical help, this is exactly what Trans in the City was set up to do, to raise the level of awareness of trans and queer voices within business. So if you are stuck, then contact the Big Tent after this and get my details off of them, and I'll help you.
Thank you very much, Bobbi. Ruth?
I think you've had some really good answers. I think what I would add is that joining a trade union is a really good move, because trade unions all have individual LGBT networks, and it can help you kind of look beyond. And similarly, joining a political party. So every political party in this country now has an LGBT network, regardless of what side you want to go on. And it will give you access to different people and outside the dating circle. I think a lot of people who are queer feel that they can only meet people on the kind of apps that enable you to hook up, but actually there are now lots of national different groups that enable you to meet people in a way that isn't focused on that, and those networks might help you find another job as well, or help you influence at your current job.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Going to move over now to Richard Angel, who's going to ask a question. Please submit the question, and then we'll move on to Michelle to make the first answer, I hope. Okay, we will.
I think maybe if you ask his question yourself, I'm not meant to sign in.
Okay, I will do. Is it possible to end HIV transmission by 2000? It is possible, sorry. It is possible to end domestic HIV transmission by 2030. What do you think needs to be done to meet this ambition target? And how do you think achieving this will change the LGBT/queer experience? We'll start with you, Michelle.
I mean, I think that if we're talking about the transition in the queer community specifically, it's just education and media. And I think that's all it's ever been, and making it as easy as possible, you know, to have safer sex. So.
Thank you. And we'll move on to Bobbi.
Yeah, I mean, completely agree. Education, funding, you know, I think free access to PrEP and stuff like that obviously is really valuable, but really education's really the key, I think.
Thank you. Ruth?
Well, Richard's the expert on this, and he knows the answers, but I think that the rolling out of compulsory relationship and sex education in schools is essential. I think we need to really be careful about any rolling back of that provision, particularly around primary schools. The extension of HPV vaccines to both boys and girls across the country, rolling that out straight away, making PrEP much more accessible, but also making sure we resource the organisations that are at the front of community activism, who are connected with those communities. My partner Caroline started off her career in the late 1980s supporting buddying at THT and HIV groups and centres and all those kind of things. I'd hate to see those provisions disappear as we enter this double recession and time of great austerity. Poverty and desperation leads to high risk-taking behaviour. We need to make sure the infrastructure's there around them to support people, so we don't see any sliding back.
Thank you, Ruth. And Pav?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to echo particularly the issue around PrEP, availability of PrEP right across the board. I think that really needs to happen. I think there has to be an awful lot more work done around challenging the stigma of HIV in the UK and overseas, because I think, you know, as a gay man, I think that's still it's still such a big issue. Preventing people accessing sexual health services, preventing them, being open about HIV status, taking risky behaviours as a consequence of, you know, the poor mental health. Also, there is a clear correlation between poor mental health and behaviours that are experienced in communities. And I think there's an awful lot of work still to be done in terms of education, but also welfare and support, but also recognising that not all communities will necessarily respond to the same messaging. I think Ruth mentioned on the outset around COVID, you know, during peak one, how the messaging really wasn't focused on communities that it turned out to be the most disproportionately affected, and that was BAME communities in particular, and that was a real problem. And I think we've got a similar issue within the LGBT community still on tackling the stigma around HIV. And I think the more people, I think Gareth Thomas, who came out recently as HIV positive, you know, I think seeing those positive role models in our communities, I think does a huge service to challenging that stigma, and we need to encourage that and be really positive and give real support to those who do come out and identify as being positive, to ensure that they're not marginalised or ostracised in society.
Thank you very much, Pav. That was a great question from the Head of Policy and Public Affairs, Richard Angel at the Terence Higgins Trust. We're now going to move on to a question from the audience, and it's a question from Sue Pascoe. And the first person will be Bobbi. Okay.
Hello.
Hey, Sue.
Hi. I've done two questions, so I'll ask the question about the recent appointment that was announced today of the chair of the Equalities and Human Rights Commission. And it seems to me that, especially around the trans debate, the Equalities and Human Rights Commission have singularly failed to protect us and have stood back and let misinformation, misrepresentation abound over the last 3 years. I wondered whether you could comment on whether you think my description is accurate or not.
To be honest, I actually had a migraine this morning, so I've missed all of the news up to about 3 o'clock. So I haven't caught up with the that news. But in terms of your description on how the Equalities Commission has let down, particularly the trans community this year and the queer community, absolutely, I think it's personally an utter disgrace. The way the government in the middle of a pandemic has really tried to introduce such harmful rollbacks of transgender rights, or at least implied to do so. I think there's been failings across government actually in the way that it's been helping with the queer community and the trans community, and not just limited to the Conservative Party, who I think have done a particularly bad job by the trans community, but I think that the other parties really had a chance to stand up and really display some of the support that was needed for the trans community this year, and they failed to do so. So I think generally all around, with the exception of perhaps the Lib Dems and the Green Party, I think it's been a massive failure all round in terms of trans support, especially this year. So I guess that great long ramble just boils down to a yes, I do agree with you, Steve.
Thank you, Bobbi. Ruth?
I think the EHRC has not covered itself in glory in lots of different ways around LGBT issues, and I look forward to meeting with the new chair. I think we shouldn't anticipate how the new chair will respond to this. I've had good meetings with the CEO at the EHRC, and I think that there is progress to be made and conversations to be had. I think when things have been technically and legally incorrect, that's caused confusion and problems, and we should expect better from the Equality and Human Rights Commission. But I'm confident that the EHRC is moving in a good direction on these issues and educating themselves at the same time about areas of legality that seem to have been confusing them so far.
Thank you, Ruth. Pav?
I'm going to be diplomatic. Like when the different equality bodies merged into the AHRC, we warned some of us that we would create hierarchies in terms of oppression and how those different issues and representations would be met and catered for, and I think that really has we're seeing that now. I mean, I'm sorry to say that I don't look to the AHRC very much anymore to give any kind of leadership. I think the LGBT movement in and of itself has done a considerable amount of work, and I'm really proud of the work that the community has done in giving voice to our communities, and that's good. We've built resilience and we've become self-sustaining in that respect. EHRC has a lot more to do still, and I'll probably leave it at that.
Thanks, Pav. Michelle?
Hi. Obviously, I can't speak to what's happening in the government and leadership in the UK, but just from my spot as a writer, I think it's really important to challenge debates when they come up. Some things just aren't debatable. I got the existence of trans people, their right to live with freedom and safety and pursue liberty and just be a human being in the world. It's not up for debate. I was contacted by a big women's magazine that was doing a story about trans women and trans exclusive radical feminists, and they wanted me to weigh in as somebody who has publicly expressed love for trans people in our communities. And my first instinct was like, oh yeah, what am I going to say? I have to totally burn them, And then I was like, wait. And I spoke to the editor. I said, but I think at this point in time, you would not run an article about homophobes debating whether, say, lesbians have a right to exist. I think we've hit a point now where these, a mainstream magazine would not do something so clearly homophobic. Obviously, nobody would be talking, about people of color's right to exist with freedom. So why are you even running this? And they were like, wow. Okay. And they killed the article. And I think that we have a lot of power to, impact the debate itself, beyond, what we say and what our talking points are. At some point, you just have to recognize that there are just people who are on their own path with things. And if you're just for freedom and protecting people's freedoms, like some things just aren't up for discussion.
Thanks, Michelle. So the final question is coming from Hugh Fell, the chair of FLAG, and it is, and we will start with Ruth here. It is, what can British LGBT plus organisations and individuals do to improve the situations of queer people facing violence and discrimination in other countries such as Chechnya, Nigeria and Poland, to name just three?
Thank you, Linda. I think this is a really important subject as the world gets increasingly polarised and divided. We can see the gulf between those countries who are progressive on LGBT plus issues and those who are not getting wider and wider. And certainly when I was Chief Exec of Stonewall, and now that I'm in the House of Lords and part of the all-party parliamentary group on this subject, it's very clear that LGBT issues are used as a weapon to demonstrate where a country stands on a range of different issues. LGBT people are almost the canary in the coal mine. I think that part of our responsibility as a nation is to make sure that we listen to the activists on the ground and help them in ways that are helpful to them, not in ways that we think are helpful to them. I think it's about making sure that the government maintains its level of financing and resource for those groups, with the merger that's come with the Foreign Office and DFID, making sure that that money available for aid keeps going to those community groups who need it the most. But I also think, and this is very important, if Britain wants to maintain its status as one of the leaders in the world on LGBT issues, and to be able to look at its own journey over the last 2 decades and the significant progress we've made in terms of same-sex marriage, adoption, all those other rights, we cannot be falling behind. And at the moment, there are a number of countries who are better than us at LGBT inclusion, not least Malta, Portugal, Denmark, Norway, and even Argentina, who are further ahead than us on many LGBT issues. So we need to make sure that we can continue to be, to borrow a phrase, world-beating on LGBT rights, so that we can continue to speak with authority in different areas. I'd also just mention finally that the issue of faith is very important. So I published over the summer a book called Queer Prophets that curates a lot of different voices of people who are Christians and LGBT from across the globe. And faith is often used as an excuse for inequalities on the grounds of LGBT. And we've got to stop perpetuating that idea through our discourse in all sorts of different ways across the globe and in Britain as well.
Thank you, Ruth. Pav?
Thanks, Linda, and thanks, Ruth, for that response. I'll touch on 4 things, really. One is a project that I worked on with Open Society Foundation, OFF, which is Right to Family Life, and reclaiming this narrative about family values and pushing back. I'm not one for being defensive on LGBT rights, and I think the right, the far right and the political right have often tried to characterize the debate as protecting families or children and so forth, and what they try to do is pretend that LGBT plus families simply don't exist. So I think reclaiming that narrative is a really important pushback that we have to do as an LGBT movement, both in this country and overseas. Secondly, I think we need to look at supporting litigation efforts in places like Romania. We've worked on projects and come from an employment law background. We've pushed back on litigation in European courts in places like Poland, in Romania, where governments have been hostile to LGBT rights and trying to protect people and using litigation, using the courts and the judicial systems. It's really critical that we do that, but it's really important that we help fund those initiatives, because those governments won't necessarily do that in those countries, and some of those colleagues need that solidarity and allyship from us. I was really privileged last year to do a big roundtable with Diane Abbott in the Commons, looking at LGBT and Commonwealth issues, and there was fantastic achievements in the Commonwealth, and it's really important that we recognise and celebrate the progress that is happening in some parts of the world, including places that we never imagined possible. In India, my motherland of India, where we managed to decriminalise homosexuality. In Pakistan, the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, which gives burial rights and inheritance rights to transgender people, has given trans people their identity on a passport. They're allowed to identify as trans on their passports. There are some enormous benefit, progressive steps that have been made. Still, of course, lots more to do. The last thing I'd say to this is my own government here in the United Kingdom, and that is look at what's happening to LGBT asylum seekers. If we recognise the deep-seated bigotry against LGBT people in Nigeria or Chechnya or elsewhere, then we have to be world leaders. Ruth borrowing Ruth's expression there. If we're going to be world leaders, then we've got to be humane, and we've got to be just, and we've got to demonstrate those values that we say that we stand up for. And that means giving LGBT asylum seekers a right to safety on these shores. And that's not happening to LGBT people, or indeed very many minorities who are fleeing war, persecution, and other terrible atrocities. And we really need to check ourselves on what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Thank you, Pav. Michelle?
I really second so much of what Ruth and Pav have said. You know, like the UK, perhaps, I mean, the US has absolutely fallen behind with the Trump administration. So many things have been rolled back, and there is a constant, you know, attempt by Republicans to continue to roll back advances that queer people have made in recent years. It's really scary. And, you know, we just have to, again, like fight for liberation in our own countries, have queer solidarity with people in all other countries. And yeah, queer asylum is incredibly important. And, you know, here in the US, immigration has been so awful ever since Trump got elected. Like immediately with the Muslim ban, it's been nothing but xenophobia and just this very fearful, resentful, xenophobic barring of people who are seeking to be safe. That's all, you know, people who are trying to be safe and have a better life. And we know that life is so hard for queer people in so many different places. So it's crucial that, you know, the UK, the US, all countries, I'm really inspired to hear about Portugal, you know, can just keep rising up with legislation and making our countries as safe as possible for ourselves and for all queers who need help.
Thanks, Michelle. Bobbi?
You know, I completely agree with all the comments made so far. I think business actually plays a large role in actually initiating some of those conversations, especially in some of those places where being queer or being LGBT is really not accepted or illegal, or in some places they face the death penalty. And we've, I think, seen global businesses really becoming more confident to stand up and express their values in those countries. I mean, we had some huge organisations that joined with Pink Dot in Singapore. We had BP and HP and lots of other organisations stand up to, I think it was item 409 against transgender people in Idaho, and even in the UK, you know, we had over 150 organisations. You know, it's I'm fairly ashamed to say this, but we had to have 150 of the world's global organisations write to the UK Parliament to tell them that rolling back trans rights in the UK was a bad idea. So, you know, it's not the case that actually we should be the leaders. We're actively rolling back, trying to roll back trans rights in the UK. So, you know, at the minute for trans rights, we're in a limbo. But, you know, I think it's that, you know, let's not pretend that things are great for LGBTQ people in the UK and you know, we have a great position and we've just slipped back a little bit. We've slipped back a hell of a lot. And global business does play a role in setting its values, getting its education level up, and then expressing to those countries, those regimes, those areas around the world what they expect the values to be for them to continue working there. And I think businesses of good standing and conscience are actually starting to do that, and starting to do that quite effectively. But really, you know, I think the points that Ruth and Pav and Michelle make are so valid.
Thank you, Bobbi. Well, I'll just try and wrap this up quickly because we're running out of time, and we're going to just hear a final thought from everybody. From my point, I've been delighted to chair the Big Tent's queer debate. As an older lesbian, I'm just going to say 30 years ago, we could not imagine having debates like this. It's just wonderful. And I can only hope that in 30 years' time, if we are still having or needing these debates, things would have also changed massively for the better, especially for the discrimination that the trans community are currently experiencing within our own community. And with that, I'm going to thank the panellists tonight individually and ask them to say a few final thoughts. And I'll start with you, Pav.
Thank you for this really, really thoughtful panel and the really thoughtful questions that you've posed to us, because I think there is far more, you know, that unites us than divides us. And I think in this moment of a global pandemic, it really makes you realise just how much work we have to do and how much more we can do when we work together. And I think that's a really, really critical message. I mean, diversity is a fact. It's a fact of life. But how we actively include people, it's that intentionality behind inclusion that we really have to work on. And I'll just say this to my trans siblings: we stand with you at UK Black Pride, because 25, 30 years ago, as non-white LGBT people, we were fighting even to have a space at the table. And now the trans communities in that same space, we're standing with you 100%, because we know what it feels like. We will stay with you.
I kind of want to clap that, actually. Michelle?
Again, I just want to say it's an honor to be part of this conversation with people who are doing such great, important work. And I feel like one of the really beautiful things about being queer is this sense of community and even family that transcends, country or nation. And so it feels really beautiful to get to be a part of a conversation that's happening, in another country. So, and I've gotten so much out of what everyone had to say. So thank you.
Thank you. Bobbi?
Yeah, I'd just like to echo Michelle's words there, because it has been so informative and so amazing being on a panel with everybody and hearing their views. And, to echo Michelle, the beauty of nature is diversity. The beauty of the world around us is its infinite variety, and that's the beauty of the human race, and it's there might be differences of opinion, and there might be differences of view, but there's a whole beauty that needs to be embraced. And I think if we do, we end up with a world that's more inclusive and more tolerant and more harmonious, and I think that's a good thing for everybody. But thank you so much for letting me speak tonight.
And finally, Ruth.
Well, thanks to Big Tent for organising it, and thanks to Linda for being a fantastic chair. Thank you, Linda. I'm really aware that it's been a pretty tough few months, and I think it's going to carry on being quite tough. And I think I'd just implore everybody who's on this call to reach out to someone who is pretty much might be alone at this time, finding their way. Don't underestimate the impact you can have on another individual, and we need to look out for each other. And if someone has to be cruel to make their point, then it's probably not a very good point. So if we can just try and keep finding our kindness. And on a completely unrelated but related note, go and support your local food banks. We volunteer at our food bank here. We've gone from 100 clients a week to 1,000 clients a week pre-COVID to now. The cost of trying to run it, take those tins of meat. I can promise you it'll make a huge difference to lots of people, and don't underestimate your own power to make a difference during this time. Thank you.